Hey all, it's Couch here, and in this How Tuesday video, we're going to be going over 3 levels of dashboards. So I had this idea inspired from like BuzzFeed's Worth It series, where they go through like 3 different foods at 3 different price ranges, and I wanted to make basically 3 different dashboards that you would expect to see. A simple, 5-minute dashboard, a standard, hour-long or 2-hour dashboard, and then a third one, which is going to be, a very time-consuming, clean dashboard. This actually only took the last dashboard that I created, or the more complicated one, is it only took me about 2 hours to make. Where it's essentially the a dashboard that we've already created, but I've added a few things to make it a little bit nicer. So I figured this would be kind of a cool video to show people who are making shiny dashboards, how they can improve it or how fast you can make it. So you can decide like how much work you want to put into a dashboard for a given project. So I'm going to show you first the simpler dashboard before we actually go through the code. We're not actually going to do a lot of coding in this video because I already did the code, and honestly, most of the coding is pretty boring. It's just copying and pasting, charts. Um, so that's not very interesting. It's pretty straightforward. It's more about like design choices and your data and what you want to actually show to your stakeholders. So this is my first dashboard, and it's a pretty simple one. It's pretty static. It just has like a fighter's. Oh yeah, and the actual data set I'm using for this these 3 dashboards is a UFC data set containing like fighters like fight stats, so like wins, losses, strikes, knockdowns, takedowns, weight class, etc. Um, so this dashboard took me literally 5 minutes to create. There's no code basically at all. It's basically showing a little table of the fighter table that I have, a little chart showing like strikes landed versus strikes received for both the strikes and takedowns. You can kind of see that. Um, what I think is pretty useful when you're creating these like very simple fast dashboards is not using just the regular table function, using data table. That way it's more interactive, where it's kind of like almost an Excel style table. You can also search. So if I say like, I don't know, Ute, right? Ute, so it'll filter for the fighter. By typing like 0, it'll find samples with zeros in it and stuff like that. I also added a standard weight class, so we can change the weight class if you want to, see how these people change. Um, so yeah, it's basically just a static page. There's only about 2 things: a chart and a table with a little filtering. Um, and yeah, so the main things that I was doing is, doing some data, wrangling, some cleaning, so creating wins, losses, so I could do some summarization of like total wins and losses. Just some, standard mutates, some selects, etc. I could probably just remove this too. I don't actually need it. Um, and then this is the actual dashboard. So right here, I have a slider input because I think dashboards are good when they're pretty interactive. So adding some type of input is pretty useful, especially since we're just looking at these tables essentially. So adding a filter, it seems pretty straightforward for that. And then for my actual outputs and visuals, I just have one plot and one data table, which is literally just a data frame. So we have this. Um, Honestly, from this code, it looks a little complicated, but right here it's just showing you. There's a bunch of I guess formatting that I apply to a table. So like removing the underscores and stuff like that, creating them as integers instead of just numeric. So just like removing the decimal places, using str to title. So we'll do like kind of like uppercase for every word, stuff like that. So in reality, it's really just a fighter data frame in a little bit of calculations, but that's pretty straightforward. And that could actually be put into this data frame right here. So it's a pretty simple table to create. You can definitely go more fancier, but since this app literally took 5 minutes to make, I just wanted to create a quick one. And then for this, it's just a standard plot with a pivot longer, so you're just showing out the landed versus received and creating a ggplot. So for this, since it's such a quick dashboard, you can see that there's Not a lot of stuff that goes into it. It's pretty messy because I didn't really clean any code. I didn't do any data wrangling really beforehand to make it simpler. There's no documentation, and there's just not a lot of plots. It's only two components essentially, which is a data table and a plot. So this is an example of a very simple, quick dashboard that you probably create just in case if you wanted to show it to someone like a colleague, but not really for like an actual full-on product. Okay, so I'm gonna go through there and then go to my average app, and this app we've actually seen before in in my past videos. It's essentially the UFC dashboard video. I didn't change anything onto it. I think this is a pretty typical dashboard you would see if you're sharing with people. For one thing, if you notice that this is not actually using the shiny template, like the default template of like that little color. Instead, it has the shiny dashboard template. So it looks a little bit cleaner because it has these little headers, little title. You can hide the sidebar if you want. Again, we have a little bit cleaner interfaces. Our ggplots look a little bit nicer. They make more sense. They're also in um, the page around the areas, right? We also have multiple ways to filter, so we can filter by weight class, so catch weight. We can do heavyweight. We still have our table too, so that's kind of cool. And then we also can adjust our elo, which will do some interactions with our plots of like elo I guess scores throughout the year, and then with our top 5 fighters for that weight class. That's pretty cool. Additionally, we have another tab, so this makes it a little bit more complicated. Generally, when you're having dashboards, there's going to be multiple pages. Right here, it's kind of cool because it's showing like it's estimating the probability of a fighter will win. I'm using a elo model, and then you can choose your fighters, um, choose your weight class. So there's a lot of interactiveness. And for this actual dashboard, I believe took me about I think in the video about 30 minutes to maybe an hour because I did some data wrangling and stuff like that. But again, it's a pretty nice dashboard, right? Because there's a tons of uses for it. I could see someone spending like a decent amount of time, like kind of just like messing with it and looking at different things that they would find interesting when they're looking at UFC stuff. So let's actually look at this code and evaluate what makes this kind of a little bit more advanced dashboard over your typical simple like static table. So one of the things that we've been doing is we added Shiny Dashboard to it, which is basically the framework for our templates and stuff. We also have some functions that are kind of just all over the place. So we have here where it says like create ELO data, and this will create our ELO data for our ELO model. Additionally, we have these sidebar menus. So right now, the actual UI looks a little bit different, and it's a little bit more complex because we have not only a page, but we also have a sidebar with different menu items that will basically choose what page we want to go to. Additionally, we have multiple pages. So, and among these actual items in our body, this is probably where the most amount of complexity goes into these dashboards is that we've added multiple different filtering options, and in our other filtering options, such as say like weight class and fighter, those are actually interacting with each other. So if I were to choose like women's bantamweight, then the fighters would be filtered out to fighters who are in that weight class. So if you're doing like a women's bantamweight filter, you wouldn't be able to choose like Henry Cejudo for a head-to-head fighter because those people would never fight. Henry Cejudo would never fight a female, although I'm sure he's trying to, as he's retired. But it's stuff like that where we're adding a little bit more logic into our filtering, just adding more filtering options, and just adding more content in our dashboard. So let's actually look at our server. I think with the UI, it looks a little bit more complex, but it's just with the framework of Shiny Dashboard, you're always gonna have to use boxes. I also added like fluid rows, so it's a little bit more organized. So my outputs like plots and tables are stacked in an even row that I can customize. So I think that's something that that adds a little bit more complexity and more formatting to it, makes it a little bit nicer. But generally, people do that also in like simple dashboards, like my previous one. Previous one. So let's actually look at this these server functions. And I'm just gonna skim this right now and just show you that one thing right here, there's a lot of like redundant code in this. So for the weight class selector, we can see that they're basically copying basically the same thing, right? So create elo data and create elo data with like different inputs. That's pretty redundant. Additionally, it's just like functionally not a good idea because we're creating a lot of variables or having to recreate a lot of variables. And even though create elo data is pretty straightforward because I'm essentially just like stacking two tables together. When you're doing something very complex, you generally don't want to repeat that process because it'll take a lot of memory from your computer and it'll actually impact your dashboard's performance. So it might lag a little bit when you're clicking around filters. It might lag when you're changing tabs. And this right now doesn't lag very much, just because the function's so fast. Because there's not a lot of data that's being wrangled. But this is a very inefficient dashboard if we were going to have a lot of people use it, or if our data was going to get really large. So that's one thing that I'm just seeing right now is we're doing a lot of repeat data creation. So that's something that we would want to fix if we were doing something else. Additionally, there's some like functions where I'm basically selecting the weight class, removing the duplicates, and then sorting by alphabetical order. That right here, I do it a few times. If you're going to be repeating the same little function in this like R script, you should probably functionalize that too. So maybe I would do like a clean function right here, so it looks a little bit nicer for the actual server side. We'll keep on going. Again, they're just standard selectors. Like I really like this selector right here, where it's just using our other weight class to filter out our other selector or our fighter selector. So our weight class selector is being used to filter our fighter selector. Okay, and then right here, we're just using a regular table. Just a pretty straightforward thing right here. Some plots, some distributions. And then one thing that I think I added that makes the dashboard a little bit more cleaner and it kind of upgrades the quality of it is like adding value boxes. Generally management and like like any type of management really likes using dashboards, and they also like using like value boxes. So value boxes are a good way to just like show literally the most important like KPI or takeaway. Generally, you're not trying to show like very complex charts to upper management people. They don't even want to look at plots. So having these value boxes or like radar charts that are very simple, very easy to kind of get a measurement of how a business or something is operating is very important. In this case, it's just showing the probability of an opponent winning. But that's kind of a good kind of way to show you like, okay, like this is the big thing that that someone should be looking at instead of just tweaking all the other stuff for the analysis. I will also say that there's not a lot of commenting. There's no comment on this dashboard, which I'm not sure. For me, I think you should probably, or I should have probably added more comments to explain what I'm doing. But since this was from a video, I was fine with not doing any insane documentation because I have a video doing it. But if you're gonna show or put an RShiny dashboard maybe into production, and that's gonna be iteratively worked on, it's something that you would have to try to at least document and then maybe even functionalize this. Okay, so that's it for the average dashboard. And I think that's a typical dashboard. But then I also created a like advanced dashboard that makes it a little bit. It fixes a lot of the voices that I did in my previous one or the average dashboard, because the advanced dashboard basically makes it a little bit more cleaner to look at, both from a user standpoint, so from people using the dashboard, and also from like a developer standpoint. So first thing that I want to show you is I'm actually gonna run the app, and let's see if that'll pop up. So again, there's nothing really changed. This is the same dashboard from the average dashboard, but I think a good upgrade for our shiny dashboards is having some type of like tooltip. And a good way to get tooltips is using Plotly. So if you have the time to actually add Plotly functions into your dashboard. It's pretty easy, especially if you're using ggplot, because Plotly has a little function that can convert ggplot objects into Plotly objects. And what I like about it is you can basically, kind of drag around, zoom, uh, get some little get some toolkits so you can see like, okay, like this guy is TJ Dillashaw in 2012. He has an ELO of like 1571, right? That's really cool. You can also do some like was it filtering, so we can filter where it's only Cejudo, only some like I don't know TJ Dillashaw. If I double click it, so you can see how there's a lot of like interactive. Um, there's a lot of ways to work with the data interactively that the user can use. You can um, you can kind of like do is drag it around, um, and all this like interactivity is very free. It's very easy to implement, and the amount of effort you put into adding this amount of interactiveness is very cheap, right? This was one line of code to convert an old static ggplot object into a interactive plot with toolkits and highlighting and exporting capabilities. So so I would definitely say that we should add a lot of Plotly stuff into your ggplot dashboards. I mean your Shiny dashboards. But for me, since I do a lot of EDAs, I'm not going to use Plotly because a lot of times on like analysis and modeling, you don't need this interactiveness because we're trying to do one certain goal. We're not really trying to explore anything. We're trying to like create a model or do something very specific. But for business intelligence and dashboarding, definitely using Plotly is the way to go. And again, I did the same thing with the distribution right here, so you can kind of see like, right, you can drag and drop, you can pan. This isn't that useful for a histogram, but it's still something that is kind of nice. So another upgrade is I converted the regular table into a data table, so you can just do some filtering, etc. Nothing too crazy. Head to head, I didn't change anything. I think this is a pretty cool plot. Maybe the one thing I changed is maybe like change this sizing so it's a little bit more formatted. Um, I really wanted to add like the fighter's actual image or profile, but that takes a lot of effort for me to do that, and I just figured that it's not really worth doing for this video. But if I were to create like a huge product and deploy it, I would definitely try to look for photos for each fighter and have that as a little profile photo. And then another thing that I added is just upgrading, just adding more tabs and upgrading these plots. So one thing that I like about RShiny and that makes it kind of stand out compared to like Tableau and Power BI is that we have access to like very customizable plots. So for this, like we can choose our weight classes, so bantamweight, and I'll just say, was it? Let's do Dominic Cruz, right? So we have like the name, the height, reach, orthodox stance, their stance, age, wins, losses, and then we have like um kind of like their offensive metrics. So this is like how many like where are they punching at. So in this case, Dominic Cruz is heavily into you know um head attacks and stuff like that. We can also switch it to maybe like a was that a heavyweight, and we can maybe find a heavyweight. Let's see here. Let's see if Franz. So Francis, all his heavyweights, right? 7 wins, 2 losses, probably all from knockouts. So one thing that I like to do is just add some very interesting plots that you wouldn't be able to create in Tableau or Power BI. So this is a thing that kind of upgrades it, right? I think this table is not great. I think I would remove fighter so it'd be a little bit more cleaner. But that's something where it's just like general formatting. And one thing that I would probably change again is just like the size of this dashboard so it'll fit and be more consistent. Right now, it's only just fitting my screen, so it's kind of hard to do a lot of development. But that's just for the actual like visual component. I think most people would agree that the advanced dashboard looks a little bit nicer than the average dashboard, and it definitely looks a lot more nicer than the basic 5 minute dashboard, which that's what we would expect. But I think from code wise, this dashboard looks really nice. So one thing that I did was just source all the functions um, into a helper function in R script. So I'm just gonna source all this. Basically, I functionalize a lot of things that I thought we could change. So that way it would reduce the clunkiness of it, and we could edit these functions independently and kind of encourage functional development for our dashboard. So these are the actual functions. I have like a cleaning function. I also incorporate reading some CSVs and data in, etc. So that's one thing that kind of makes the plot a lot cleaner. I think if you just look at the UI part, nothing's really changed, but it just looks a little bit nicer. I did some formatting where it's like all my tab items are staggered. Everything kind of matches what we would expect to see, right? So if I was looking at this, I could basically pick out like, well, I want to look at my fire tab. I want to look at my radar chart from that tab. So the UI isn't really different. Added some more tabs, just added more content to it, but nothing fundamentally has really changed. The big thing that I think makes a good dashboard, especially for development, is just like having things function created as like a function. So one of the things I did was I created a helper, which will basically load in our helper functions. Additionally, since we were always basically redoing these, basically what is it? Repeating these commands. So we're always creating more elo data for each of our plots. We just created this or converted it to a reactive function. And this basically allows us to like hold these things that are being filtered into our global environment and then use these global features or like data frames essentially in our functions. So that way we don't actually have to, uh, you know, rerun this function or create our elo data and stack all this stuff and do all this data manipulation every time. Instead, we're just going to do it once and store it until we actually change the filter. In this case, our filter is like our K sensitivity value. So that makes the dashboard so much faster, and it also just makes it look cleaner. So we don't have to say like, what is create elo data? Like what's that? We can just say, oh, it's our elo data frame. It's elo one for our first page, right? I also incorporated some like cleaning scripts. So I said clean weight class. I kind of like it looked piped in, just because I write a lot of pipes. But if I wanted to make this even cleaner, maybe I would even just like put this and throw it into an actual throw it into one of these global variables, right? Or I could just put elo1 inside the actual clean weight class function, and we could like remove this pipe. I think that's pretty. I don't think there's like a good convention for it. It's just something I prefer with piping. So you can see how all these things are very clean. I will say one thing that I wish I kind of changed is just converted these into functions. But I'm not that good with creating like render objects or just like converting RShiny objects into functions. I know that's how a lot of people do it, but I really don't do a lot of RShiny development. But I did the best that I can do with the things. But there's definitely a thing where we could just convert this into a function where the only thing we would change is essentially the input ID, which is definitely very doable. So that's one thing that we could improve a little bit. But other than that, let's actually go down here to our plotly. So this is how I actually created and upgraded my ggplots for my dashboard. It's just as simple by just saying render plotly instead of render plot, and then wrapping your ggplot object with ggplotly. So that amount of work, which is about essentially just 2 words that you're doing or 2 little commands, will kind of just upgrade your ggplots and your dashboards with the interactiveness, and I think it looks a little bit cleaner. So adding that, I think, is at like for the amount of effort it takes, just has so much more value in your dashboards. And then lastly, my actual radar plot was essentially just using Plotly, because Plotly has let me look up plotly.com. So Plotly actually has a lot of different other charts that you can create. So let me see if we can go dash. So I think Plotly is a good, or our Plotly has a good site if you want to add in very kooky kind of weird charts that you think the user will really create. Like one of the things I use Plotly for is making 3D plots that are like interactive. I think these are very cool, and sometimes in my field is not very useful, but I'm sure if you're in like physics or something else, this would help a lot for a dashboard that you're going to develop. Okay, let's see here. So I think that's really it for this video. I know there's not a lot of code into it, and I know we didn't really go over a lot of we haven't really gone over the Tidy Tuesday data set. I am planning on doing that. I I do think I need to make a video about big data. So hopefully I can get that out next week. But in the meantime, I'll see you guys next week and tidy on.